Ooh, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Obsession Podcast. Karl. We're here at my house today. It's actually raining outside here in southern Wisconsin, which is awesome because we have been in a drought for like the last 45 days with almost zero rain. So that being said, I'm going to start building my hunting arrows for this year. So show you guys kind of the process that I go through to make 24 arrows every year for hunting and try and match them up the best we can. We're going to start with basically finding the spine on the shaft. I'm going to show you guys that. Thinking about changing a couple things up this year. We always use Black Eagle arrows, so you guys are going to see me run the Rampage this year, where last year I shot the X Impact. But the Rampage I have shot in years past. Fairly heavy arrow, should be coming in right around that 500 grains with a 125 on the nose. Really good forward to center of about 17%. So what we're looking for, we're going to run wraps, 4 vanes. We always use AAE vanes. You'll see us run those again this year, Mike and I both. The one thing I'm thinking about changing is I may put a lighted knock in it. I'm not a huge lighted knock fan. We have a couple different types of lighted knocks we're going to test out here. And we'll show you guys the testing throughout the year and what happens with that. The reason I'm not a big fan of lighted knocks is they seem to be inconsistent at longer yardages, and when we're out west we will be shooting longer yardages. 70 yards and to 100 yards on antelope if it's spot and stock. And mule deer, 80 to 100 yards is also a common shot. 50 is short, so it's important to have your arrows and your bows and your broadheads and everything tuned to make sure you can make these shots. So that being said, we'll get right to it. I'll show you guys the process I'm going to use. First, I'm going to spine test. I don't have a big tool, fancy tool for it, but I do have a long bar clamp. And I'll show you how I go about doing that, checking the spine on the shafts, and then we'll mark it. And then we will make sure that everything aligns correctly so we can place our vanes on our shafts and everything's common. So stick around. Okay, so obviously, to start with, we've got Black Eagle Rampages. I shoot a 350 spine. My bow's set at, basically, my bow's a 65-pound bow, 29-inch draw. I'm going to be shooting a 350 spine, stainless steel Black Eagle outsert deal on the front of these Rampages, with 125 grains of Exodus mechanical, with 125 grains of Exodus fixed blade broadhead on the front of it by QAD. So that being said, these are all 001s. For precision, I try to run the best arrow I can afford to buy, and the best arrow they make is 001s on all their arrows, whether it be X Impact, Deep Impact, Zombie Slayers, Carnivores, Rampages, whatever. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll open these all up and I'll get them set out. We'll look for any flaws on the shafts themselves first, which I've never found one. And then I'll show you guys how I put the insert in it with 2 field points on each end, and a field point on each end. And then we'll run it through our flexing process with a handy dandy wood bar clamp. And then we'll mark it. That way we know where our spine is. And we will go from there. Excellent. So obviously the first thing I want to do is I am going to get 2 of our inserts out. And I am going to commence to pulling all these knocks out of these arrows. And then we will set an insert inside each one on each end, like so. So basically, we're taking an insert and putting it in each end of the arrow, just like so. And I'm going to put a field point on each end of that. So I happen to have those right here. So this gives us a distinct point. Also, on the clamp itself, there's a mark that I've put in the clamp, so the field point kind of sits and holds its place on the clamp. Obviously, you don't glue these in. So once we have these built, we can just continue to use these on each shaft. So now at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the clamp, we're going to open it up so we can obviously push this up a little bit, give us some space so you guys can see exactly what we got going on here. Now, we've got to, what I'm going to do is turn that, so the wording here on this one side is the same. It'll be the same for all of them. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is put a little pressure on this. If you look, you see how the arrow bends down right there? So that's indicating the spine. So this one bends straight down. So that basically is telling me that right here where it says caution, inspect complete shaft, flex twist each shaft before shot additional, that is the very top edge. So the spine is weak on the opposite side. So your heavy spine is like across the top of that. So it flexes straight down. So your spine is right there. And that spine is where the carbon's actually overlapped. It creates a stronger space in the shaft itself, just because of the overlap. So the carbon's bound together like that. So it seems very consistent. So the other thing we're going to do is I'm going to loosen this up. I'm going to move this a little bit just to make sure that we see the same thing. So we got to turn that, make that straight down. Yeah, buddy. Turn it just a little bit more. There we go. So what I'm looking for is that exact vertical change. So I know that this on top is the strongest part of the shaft. So it's flexing down. So that being said, we're going to mark that marker to work. All we're really going to do is make a little line on the top of the shaft. Just like that. Verify again that that's our flex. Which it is. And that shaft is checked for spine. So, that being said, we've only got 23 left to do. So, we will do that and we'll start going now. So the one thing about Black Eagle arrows that I notice is they're pretty much spine the same based on how the graphics are put on the shaft. I mean, they're really close. They're off just a little bit left or right sometimes, but usually they're pretty dang close to center with the warning on the label where it says check your shaft. So that's pretty important information when you guys, if you use Black Eagles, to check. I mean, use that as a starting reference, and it's probably going to be within a few degrees each direction of where the actual spine is on the shaft. So pretty cool little note. I think all the shafts are basically made that way, so we'll finish these up here, and when we're done I'll show you what the next step is for making the perfect hunting arrow. So we have all 24 shafts marked for spine. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that little mark, but basically you can see the white mark on there. So that's indicating the spine on the shaft. So at this point we will decide what wraps we're going to put on the arrows. Colors of veins, vein configuration, and so on. Mike and I have been shooting the same vein configuration for, I want to say, the last 10 years. We shoot a 4 vein configuration, which is what you guys see right here. It's Max Stealth from AAE. And I'm going to use AAE wraps again this year. I like a wrap on the arrow, you know, just for blood, be able to see what you've got for blood. It adds a little weight to the arrow, and on the tail of the shaft. With our forward to center, it's basically irrelevant. We run that big stainless steel insert outsert deal from Black Eagle also, which I believe is 53 grains, and then we throw 125 grain fixed blade on the nose of it. Mike shoots a Thunderhead fixed blade, and I shoot the QAD Exodus. Both great heads, both got the same cutting pattern basically. So that being said, I'm going to start putting wraps on these particular arrows, and then we will talk about nocks here in a little bit. I'll show you guys kind of what I'm thinking I'm going to use. We'll do some testing with some lighted nocks, and we'll see what happens. So with that, that'll be another show altogether, but we're going to put the wraps on, show you guys the vein configuration with 4 veins. We use 3 degrees of offset with right helical. Both of our bows actually spin the shafts out of the bow right, so that's why you use a right helical. Also very important, a lot of bows, they'll actually have a left launch. So what happens is your arrow starts out of the bow turning left, and then because you used a right helical or a right offset, it'll go like this, and it'll stop, and then it'll start coming back the other direction, which causes accuracy issues at longer yardages downrange, which is somewhat hard to see sometimes. So anyway, let's get going. We'll put the wraps on, show you guys the vein configuration, and we'll cut the arrows down the size. AAE wraps set up. Really simple setup, guys. Alright, so because I'm somewhat anal, I always lay my wraps the same direction. I like to use a mouse pad when I do this. Pretty simple. Try to keep my fingers off as much as possible. The shafts have been cleaned already. And the other thing you'll see is leave about 1/8 of an inch of shaft down here at the end when I go to wrap this. And the reason for that is I want to be able to see my spine mark, and then my vein actually sits right at the edge of the wrap also. So we'll do a couple here, then I'll show you a close-up of it. I always square it up with the edge and then just roll it. As soon as I get it past the edge, I'll run my fingers up and down that seam and create that seam. And that right there is what you get. You guys can see the little spine mark on that shaft. That's how I like to run my wraps. That way I have my indication on the back side also. So we'll show you guys what this looks like close up. Alright, well, I would say the other thing we have to talk about is making sure the shaft is square on the knock end, on the tail end. Your best way, obviously, is to glue this on, but you don't have to as long as you keep pressure. So I got this basically arrow spinner, and then it's got this base piece on the back side of it for squaring up the ends. They're usually pretty square, but keep a little pressure back, keep against that base and spin it, and it helps square that up. You can tell if it takes any off based off of how your carbon roll looks at the end on the sandpaper. But you want to square up all your ends. The tails of the shaft where the knock seats. You also square up the head of the shaft or the front of the shaft after they cut the length. That way we've got a good base for our knocks, no matter what knock we decide to use. I've got these nocturnals here that lighted knock, nocturnal lighted knock, basically for the 204s, which is alright, right there. So at that point, see the lighted knock set up in there. I will have to test these just to see if I think they're going to work all right for out west at longer yardages. I don't trust lighted knocks, to be honest with you. They're very inconsistent. So that being said, we will run them through a test here in the next week or two just to make sure that we think they'll fly consistently compared to a regular standard knock. If not, we'll hunt with regular standard knocks. For whitetails, 20, 30, maybe even 40 yards, it's not near as relevant. But when you're shooting a short shot's 50 and standard shot's probably 70 to 80 and out even further, knocks start to become very, very important. The majority of the reason that you have issues with lighted knocks is due to clearances for launch switches. The other thing too is some of the necks on these knocks, because they have to put a battery in them, are a little bit weak at points. So high speed, high strung bows shooting heavy arrows
Causes a lot of stress on that, and you get the knock actually breaks right at that neck, right where it joins the outer knock system. That seems to be an issue with a lot of lighted knocks. So something to keep in mind also when you guys are using lighted knocks. So make sure you check your knocks as much as you do your arrows to make sure everything is good. That being said, we're going to fletch out 6 of these and cut them to length, put the inserts in them, and we will practice with those. And I'll show you that in another video, just to see if we have any inconsistencies. We'll have 3 with lighted knocks and 3 without lighted knocks. I will go through in my knock tuning process. I'll show you guys all of that also. But you get out of things what you put into it. So success is based off of hard work and time put into it. So let's move on. So now that we've got our arrows cut and squared at the tail and our spine set, I got some Black Eagle R knocks, which are for rampages. We're going to insert. I'm going to use yellow on these particular shafts just because it's a bright color and I think it's cool. So we're going to insert that, and we're going to set the neck of our knock square with our spine. We'll do that on all 12 of them. And the other arrows, in case you're wondering, that we have are set with nocturnals, which we have right there. You can see it's got a deep throat in that knock. This is a deep throat single lock, deep throat dual lock. It will cause different arrow flights. Now the lighted knocks we're going to test, and of course we can always pull them out and put the R knock in if we don't like what we're seeing. But we have a dozen of those made up. And that's the nocturnal. What I did is I had some 166 nocturnals, and I had a bunch of sleeves. The 204 nocturnal was basically 21 grains, and the 166 nocturnal was 14 grains, a little over 14 grains. And the sleeves that I had were a little over 1 grain. So what we ended up with was about 16 grains on the tail with the 166 knock, which is still lighter than the 204 nocturnal, which was basically 21 grains on my scale. So that being said, these are 9 grains. So there is a slight difference between the lighted knocks and these Black Eagle R knocks. Could cause some downrange at long yardage change if you were to shoot, 60 to 100 yards, I would assume. We can test for that too. But we are making sure that we've got everything set up here. So I have 2 other arrows that have to have knocks. So I've got some green R knocks. Maybe we'll use 2 of those. make sure again that those are all set to the spine. So now we got 14. Everything's set. Alright. So now alrighty then. Here's what we got going on, so everybody's aware. There are 14 cut at proper length Rampage 350-001s with a standard Black Eagle R-Knock on them. And there are 10 Rampage 350-001s with nocturnal lighted knocks cut at the same length. So we'll weigh the arrows out, show you guys the difference here. I'm assuming it's going to be, I don't know, 8 to 9 grains probably, getting close. We'll do that after we put the inserts in the arrows, and we'll show you guys the difference there. Now, downrange, is that going to cause a large issue? I'm assuming that 60, 70, 80, 100 yards, you're going to see a little bit of vertical difference. Probably not enough where I think it's going to be a huge problem. We'll test it and show it to you guys. You know, if you want to be within 1 grain of each other, you're going to have to play with stuff quite a bit. I've found for hunting that you really don't have to be within, 5 grains for the average hunter is probably good. Because if you guys go to a bow shop and you have them build you arrows, I'm sure they fluctuate between 5 and 7 grains just because of components weighing a little bit different, things like that. You can weigh them all out. For just hunting, I don't see it being an issue. If you're target shooting where money is involved, it starts to become an issue. It can be very, very important. That's my opinion. It's also very important during hunting if it was a large distance or a longer distance where you're 2 to 3 inch difference at 100 yards. If you were to take that shot, I'm assuming that would be a large issue also. But that being said, I haven't had a problem with my arrows all weighing within 5 grains of each other. And I've shot animals all to 100 plus yards. So same with Mike. I build all of Mike's arrows also. So everything's consistent through that. We're going to be putting vanes on next. We'll show you guys that. Also be putting the inserts in the arrow, and we'll do a little weighting. Alright guys, so the next step on the build is to square up the fronts, because we just cut them. So you do that the same way we did the tails. Off the saw, they're going to be pretty good. But we're going to just check each and every one of them. Inserts being put in. The Black Eagles aren't so bad because it has a long tail. The longer stainless tail here goes basically a full inch inside the shaft. So another thing I like about the Black Eagles and the 204 is it actually helps strengthen the front of the arrow and gives you more forward of center for penetration on game. So basically we're running 178 grain broadhead on the front of our arrows. So those are done.
Some adhesives to use.
It's time to start putting inserts.
I'm going to tell you guys the truth. This is what I use.
A lot of guys will tell you have to mix up 2-part epoxy. And utilize that. I actually don't do that. I actually use AEE's Max Bond It's the same stuff I actually use for doing my veins. It's a quick dry epoxy. I have never had an issue. So I put a firm amount of epoxy on the end, right where it's ribbed here. You can see I rotate it, basically rotate it back and forth, fill it with epoxy, fair amount on there. At that point, I pick the shaft I'm going to use and I spin it in and run it part way up, or part way up, part way up, part way up, seat it. Now you've got a good ring of epoxy around the outer edge. Me, I take my finger like this and seal that. And that is what I get. I have yet to have any issues with an insert coming out of a shaft. So, if you want to use 24-hour epoxy or the 8-hour epoxy or even the 5-minute epoxy, the 2-part, I think that works well also. But I've never had a problem with this quick drying epoxy. Seems to work very well. So, tail of it, we got one shaft done there. You're gonna fletch. You know, you got 120 degrees, 90 degrees. It says 75 by 150. Or sorry, 105, which is basically the guys that used to or still use recurves or longbows sometimes fletch their arrows that way. So that being said, right now I had it on 3-vein configuration, which is 120 degrees. I'm going to back that set screw out and I'm going to take the 90 degree and move it in. When you're setting one of these, it's spring loaded, so you can feel the detents in the knob. You can tighten them down too much, just so you're aware. So you want that detent to just barely, so you can feel it and it seats. And test it. There's a spring inside of each one of these where the set screw goes down to the main shaft that controls the positioning. So now we're set at 90s, which will give us a 4-vein configuration. We're going to set our shaft inside there. And we will start with, I've got primer pens right here. So I do use a primer pen on all of my veins for my customers and for Mike and myself, obviously. But I use AAE's Maxwell primer pens. All you do is get that primer out and going. So it's a little bit of liquid you'll see come out of there, which is basically acetone. I like to run my vein about an 1/8 inch off the base. I run it all the way back to the tail edge of this clamp. Okay, you guys can see I got a right helical clamp, and I've also got the offset set at 3 degrees, which is quite a bit. So we run 3 degrees of offset plus right helical, and that's right offset. So now that we got the primer on there, I'm going to pick out about 10 spots along the vein. I'm going to put it a little bit on each one. At that point, I'm going to just dip it on this piece of paper. Pulls a little bit of the glue off. Set the clamp on the base because we've already preset our degree. Set the shaft on there. I usually just count to 10 because this is a quick dry setup. And I will pull that off and move to the next one. So we're clipped right there. The detent is fair. I'm actually going to add a little more pressure to it so I can feel it a little bit better. I like that better. And we're going to pull off 2 few more of these. So we'll have 2 red and 2 white on each one of these for Mike. So now we go to the red. Same setup, about an 1/8 inch down. Primer pen to clean off any of the residue or anything that may be on the vein. Same deal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nose and tail are very important. Don't hesitate to put a little extra on that. Set your base, bring your clamp down. Set your base. Boom. So this one is the Must Be Nice arrow, again with the 1/8 of an inch. I'm putting glue probably every 1/4 inch, somewhere in there. That way you don't get a lot of glue coming out over the edges, and it holds your veins really, really well. One more left. And if you use a lot, you actually see the wetness on the vein. You got to let it dry off just a little bit. Otherwise what happens is your glue will start to actually cure really quickly. And if you do that, sometimes you'll start to see a white residue if you don't have a wrap or something on it. Or even if you do, basically. If you don't have a white wrap, then it shows and kind of looks like crap. So, not that the deer care, but a lot of people are really touchy about how their arrows look. And that's understandable. They're expensive. So, that being said, once you're done, perfect 4 vein setup, 3-degree offset to the right with a right helical, because that's what our arrows do. And Mike's got a brand new Reapers from Above arrow. He'll like that. Plus, he's got the Cam Hanes on there. Must Be Nice. Nobody cares. Work harder. That pretty much covers how to make our arrows. Like I said, I'm going to do the same thing on my other arrows, my hunting arrows. Configuration wise, we like the 4 vein. They seem to be more stable out past 70 yards, I can say that. We've tested that. We've been running 4 veins for years and years, and the reason for that is we shoot fixed blade heads, and the configuration seems more stable at longer yardages when we're out west. So you guys make your own decisions on that. 3-4 vein, do your own testing, just like everything else, anything in archery. Everybody has their own opinions. These are ours. Hopefully you learned something today, made it a little bit easier, show you guys how much effort goes into making a consistent hunting arrow. We appreciate you guys watching the Obsession Podcast, small property layouts on Saturdays for the podcast and Wednesdays for the small property layouts. That's the program where we show you guys what we're doing to our properties to hopefully successfully film a good hunt for you guys to watch this fall. We appreciate each and every one of you. If you get a chance, subscribe to the channel. Just hit the Reaper down there in the right hand corner. We would appreciate that. If you want to listen to the podcast on Saturday, you can listen to them on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, RSS.com,